Hi everyone, Nigel Saunders here. We are back for part 2 of winter work on my larch forest. In part 1 of this video, I cleaned up the landscape. I picked off all the needles that had fallen off the trees in fall. I added a little cave to the landscape here, and I added a branch that had washed up on the shoreline here, and did a general cleanup of the moss. In part 2 of this series, I'm going to continue cleaning up the landscape. I still have a lot of needles to clean up on the back of the planting. After that, I'm going to do a little bit of pruning of the moss, and then I'll tackle the main trees, pruning out some of the branches that just don't need to be there. I'll rotate the forest around to the back. So you can see I still have a lot of needles to clean up on the back side of the forest. All right, here I go with the cleanup. So this forest is in a mica pot at the moment, and if I want to display it in the Toronto show and have it look really good, I'll need to find a nice clay pot for it to go in, sort of a show pot. That's going to be hard to find. I'm going to have to look hard. They do make them this size. I'm sure I can find one. It's just a matter of reaching out. I'll try Chris Hendry. He might have some. Bonsai Guru. If I can't find any there, I don't know. Maybe I can ask some club members if they have any big pots they're not using. I don't think I have any that would suit this forest planting, but I can definitely look around and see what I have. But I'm pretty sure I don't have anything this large. We got some snow last night, and the weather's going to be quite cool for the next few days. Then, after that, it's going to slowly warm up, and got rain in the forecast. Sure has been a strange winter. So far, January's been very, very warm. It's funny, in the summertime, you're so busy that I fondly look back on the winter time, where every day I've got, no appointments, no bonsai shows. I don't go to many meetings in the winter, and I just work on my trees every day, and it's kind of peaceful. And then when summer comes, everything starts going. You get bonsai shows, we get visitors, meetings, backyard tours, and there's all kinds of stuff going on, and it gets so busy sometimes that I look fondly back at the days of winter where it was just me peacefully working away on my trees in the backyard. So it's kind of nice to have that period of rest where I'm not taking a break from bonsai or anything, but things slow down in the winter. You can do projects like I try and do a project every year where I'm working on something. This year I kind of did that temple in the fall, and I'll be back to work on that before the winter ends. One thing is for sure, this greenhouse has sure changed the way I do bonsai. It allows me to work on my trees all winter long. They're not covered in snow or in the ground or mulched into a cold frame or anything. They're here in the greenhouse, kept just above freezing, and I can work on them all winter long, which is just fantastic. It really allows you to, take your time on each tree and each planting. Get it all ready for spring. So yeah, and if I left these trees until spring, you've got your repotting in spring, and then you have to prune and repot, and it would just be too busy. I couldn't handle the amount of trees I have. But so this greenhouse is just fantastic. It sure has changed the way I do bonsai. I've tried using a brush for the needles to kind of brush them off. It kind of works. It kind of spreads them around too. But I think, you know, maybe you could brush the initial, you know, most of them off and then pick the rest by tweezers. And I notice it displaces some of the moss, but you just push it back in place. So I don't know. Brushing kind of works. I wouldn't say it's 100%, but it tends to spread the needles around more than brushing them off. But I'm making good progress removing all the needles from the planting. I think it'll take me another 15 minutes and I'll be done. It sure is windy and cold outside. Nice to be working here. Out of the wind and the weather. The heater running. I have got the back side of the planting all cleared of needles now. I wouldn't say I've got 100% of them, but I got, I don't know, maybe 98% of them out. So my next task is to prune up the moss. If you look now, the moss is quite a nice height, but what'll happen in spring is it'll double in height. It'll grow very high and it won't look very miniature. So I've got to come in with the scissors, trim all the moss back as far as I can, keeping it, you know, nice and green in the planting. I also have to clear away moss from the base of the trees. If you look down here, you can see there's moss around the trunks, right in there too. All around here I've got to clean moss, otherwise it starts climbing up the tree trunks. It can rot out the bark there and create a bit of an undercut on the tree. So it's important to keep the moss cleared away from the base of your trees. I've got all my curved scissors. These curved scissors are really good for coming in and pruning moss. So I'm just going to trim all the loose ends of the moss back, keeping it green. And some areas, you know, I've got bushes started, so I'll kind of exaggerate the shape of the bushes, trying to, you know, get some nice form to the moss. On some, you can see there's dried ends in the moss. I just prune those off. Back to the green part. And that's just from the summertime when the moss dried out on a hot day. It kind of turns a bit crispy at the edges. So this is very important to trim your moss back. Otherwise, as I said, it'll just double or triple in height. You want it nice and trim, and keep it trim until, you know, your show has come. And these scissors are, I think they're for cutting away stitches or something. They're medical scissors. I get them at the surplus store. But you could get them at a medical supply store. Probably order them online, I imagine. But they're really good. Nothing's better for trimming moss than these curved scissors. I like to keep some areas of moss long and some really short. And that creates variety. It makes it look like different plants and that on the forest floor. So here's one out front. I'm going to keep part of it long and prune away all the rest short. So it'll make it kind of exaggerated. It'll look more like a bush. So the moss around the tree trunks, I pick the moss off the trunks. Any moss growing up the bark, get rid of that, because it holds moisture, makes your bark soft, and it'll eventually rot away. And instead of having nice bark all the way down to the soil line, you'll get this discolored kind of rotted section, which doesn't look good. And clean it away from your roots too. So that's looking much better around the base of this tree. All the operations that I've done to this forest so far haven't been dramatic. You know, I'm not pruning branches off trees or anything. They're just little details, cleaning it up, pruning the moss, cleaning the moss away from the trunks. But they all add up to creating a beautiful forest. It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience to do these operations, but you really notice it in the end, especially when it's in a show. You can notice a tree that's prepared really well, or a forest, versus one that was just kind of put together quickly. All the little details really, they make the forest shine. As you work away on your forest, you'll notice that you're starting to view the forest like it's a full-size forest. And any detail that's out of scale, like you'll see needles on top of the moss and they stand out, things start to become more obvious as you start refining your forest. You look at it and you go, oh, that doesn't look right, there's a weed there, or there's needles falling down here that look out of scale. So yeah, it's as you work away on the forest, your eye becomes more and more critical of the details. That's what I find. Here's a look at the base of that tree. So you can see the moss is all removed. You can see how the moss was keeping the base of the trunk wet. I got it removed from the back here too. You can see the moss used to be climbing up, quite high on the trunk. You can see this one is the same. The moss is climbing up really high on it. So I've got to get that off. Here's the base of that tree. You can see the moss has been cleared away from the front too. Yeah, it's looking quite nice. So now I've got to do this one over here. I've got all the moss cleared away from the trees. You can see it's starting to dry out where the moss was. You can see where it's kind of wet here. Over here, it's starting to dry out. So that's good. So that job is done, clearing away all the moss from the base of the trees. So I'm still working on pruning the moss, kind of getting my moss bushes, getting it pruned back to size so it's not so long and shaggy looking. So I'll keep working away at that. And then the next operation will be to add moss. There's some areas where the moss isn't looking so good. Maybe here. There's one big kind of boring clump. I could break that up, keep some of these as bushes, add the fine moss kind of in the middle to break it up. There's a clump here that's also kind of not so interesting. So just to get variety in the landscape, I think it's really important so it looks more miniature. Otherwise, you don't want all your moss to look the same. Otherwise it kind of looks less miniature. It looks more uniform and looks like it belongs in a grassy field instead of on a forest floor. Here's a look at my tray of moss. So I just brought this in from outside. It was frozen, but it's thawed out over the last couple of days. So it's nice and green still. These plastic trays that, come under your bonsai pots that you buy online or wherever you find them, they're really good. You just keep a bit of water in the bottom of the tray, throw some moss in, and they seems to stay green all year round, which is really nice to keep moss on hand. So I'll be adding, little clumps of this fine moss in between my coarse pieces, just trying to detail the landscape. And, it's just up to you. You can use your imagination, do whatever you want. But that's what I'm going to work on next, is just sort of adding interesting little details to the landscape. I guess you'd call it mosscaping. So on this clump here, I'll pick out, I've got fine moss here, so I'll have a clump of coarse moss, and then I'll have some fine moss. I think kind of breaking up my the edge near the water here. So alternate between fine and coarse, and I think that'll look more interesting and more realistic looking. So I'm just digging out my coarse moss like that. And then I'll put a bit of the fine moss in on the edge here. So I've got my fine moss. I'll just keep a small piece of it and just plant it in like that. So already you can see it's more interesting. It's more, uneven. It's not all the same kind of moss there. So I'll continue. I'll go around back now. And I'm going to put some fine moss up top here. I'll get rid of the coarse moss. I'll just keep the coarse moss near the edge by the water so it looks more like bushes. And the fine moss will be underneath the trees. It'll look like some fine ground cover growing. So I sure hope I can find a pot for this. A nice clay pot. If I can't, I can always show it in the mica pot. It's not as finished looking as a nice clay pot, but when you get up to this size of pots, it's pretty hard to find a nice clay pot. They get very, very expensive too. Just going to take away some of the sand here too. So you can see I've cleared the coarse moss away from the base of the tree here. So now I'll add some fine moss. I'll put a piece right here. I don't want it too close to the tree. Make sure it's really well planted, your moss. Really push it down. Make sure it conforms to the landscape, that you don't have any air gaps or anything. And then once it starts growing, it'll look quite nice. Yeah, so there, that area looks much nicer now. Now I think out here, I think I have a little too much sand here. I'm just going to add a bit of moss, and I'll just add like maybe a little bush there. Like that. Kind of break it up a bit so it's half sand, half bush. So I said here too, it's kind of coarse moss all in this area, so I need to break that up a bit. So I've got fine moss here, so I'll keep some coarse moss, and then around here I'll dig out the coarse moss like that. Keep that clump in case I want it for somewhere else. And I'll dig out a bit more around the trees here. I'll keep the coarse moss by the rocks to look like bushes. So now I can plant some fine moss in there. Okay, that's looking good. So now I have a variety of moss in this area. It looks much, much nicer. So I'm just going to do a little more moss pruning here. I've been working away at the landscape and I'm very happy with it. I think it's looking good. I'm going to try, if you look at this clump of moss, it has all the vertical spores in it, which look like reeds. So I'm going to try putting that around the water's edge just to see what it looks like. I think it'll look pretty good. I'll just want little strips of it. So I'm going to cut it into strips. I'll kind of like that, so you can see my little strip has all the little spore heads sticking up. And I'll put it around in front of this rock here. And I'll use my tweezers to kind of push it in place. Like that. That looks quite nice. It's just a little detail that makes it look a little more realistic. Much of the work that I'm doing today will have to be touched up before the show. The moss will grow. I'll have to prune it all again and maybe, clean up the surface of the soil once again. But, all the ideas here are in place now. So that's good. It's getting there. So now I'm going to start working on the trees themselves. I'm not going to be doing a whole lot of pruning on the trees today. I usually leave the pruning until the buds are swelling in spring. Then I'm sure which buds are alive and which ones may be dead, and I can prune back to living buds. So I leave that detail pruning closer till spring. But today I'm going to prune back some of these branches that I've missed. In the last pruning, there's a branch here that starts here and grows way across over here. So there's a lot of branches that are just really long on the interior here that I've just missed from my last pruning. So I'll get those all pruned up. You can see there's an X shape here of branches. All right, here I go with the pruning. So I've got a shoot here. I'm looking for buds. There's one on top. There's one on the bottom. I'll trim to the bottom one. So there's a look at how long that branch was. There's another one here. I'll prune it back to here. There's another long branch pruned off. There's one on the inside here. These long scissors are good. You can reach into these for some prune. So there's that branch pruned off. Another long one. Up here in the apex of the trees, you can see I have a lot of growth. You can see all the branches in the apex, so that needs to be cleaned out. So it's a simpler structure up top and gets more detailed as you go down below, because all the vigor in the tree is up top. And if you let all these branches grow, you're going to end up with a big thick apex on the tree. So that all has to be thinned before the trees start growing in spring. You can see I've already thinned this one. I must have done that last time I pruned it. It hasn't grown a whole lot. Yeah, so, more pruning in the top of the tree and less pruning as you go down because of the cone of vigor. There's more vigor in the top and less in the bottom. I get a lot of questions in the comment section. How big is this pot? So I'll show you the measurements of this forest. So the height of it from the edge of the pot to the top of the tallest tree is about 23.5 inches. The pot itself is 27 inches long by, the width is about 14 inches wide. So that's the rough dimensions of the forest. All my winter work is done on the larch forest for now, so the next time I work on it will be in spring when the buds are swelling, and I'll give the trees a good pruning. Let's fly in now and have a look at the forest. that is all the work I'll be doing to my larch forest for today. I'm Nigel Saunders. Thanks for joining me in the Bonsai Zone.